What's up? So, sorry I couldn't show you this in person, so hopefully video is the next best thing. I'm going to show you three basic things, just what to check on the bike real quick before getting on, what's what on the bike, and then lastly, the basics of riding. Let's do it. Alright, so here we have the lovely Ducati Scrambler, and there's two things I always check on the bike, especially if it's not mine. If it is mine, I'm checking it usually at least once a week. Number one is the thread on the tires. So you can see it's got some life left in it, so we're good there. Check the back real quick, got some life, perfect. And number two is the tire pressure. So the way I check that is just give it a little bit of pressure. If it doesn't have any give, that means it's really good. If you want to be legit, which I definitely recommend, is check the recommended tire pressure on the side of the tire. Go to the gas station using a tire gauge and put it to the right pressure. If you're going to be riding off-road, usually drop it 10 or 15 psi. So that way there's a little bit more give when you're off-road. So that's number one. Number two is to check the oil, the window right here. So if you're standing on the side of the bike where the bike is leaning away from you, all you have to do is grab the handlebar, pull it towards you just a little bit to where the bike is standing straight up, and you can see the oil is now filling up. So, and you can check number one if it's full, and number two how dark it is or dirty it is. So if it's getting really dark and dirty, that means it's about time to change the oil. And obviously if it's getting low, you want to add some oil right there. Those are the two main things I always check. Now what's what on the bike? We'll start with the clutch, of course. So you've got your clutch on the left and the shifter on the left, and then the brake on the right, front brake on the right, back brake on the bottom. Let's talk about the clutch real quick and the shifter on the motorcycle. So 99.9% of motorcycles, of course, are going to have the standard shifter. So unlike in a car where it moves to different places depending on the gear, it stays in the same place and you just click it down or click it up. So right now it is in, so when you go to the very bottom where it won't go anymore, that's first, right? You do half a click up and it goes to neutral. You do a full click up and it goes to second, and third, fourth, fifth. And you'll hear it click into each gear. That's when you know you did it right. Let's go back down to first. All right, it won't go anymore. We're in first. Most bikes, of course, have 5 to 6 gears. So as you're riding, pull it to a stoplight, always push it down a few times, give it a few taps until it's in first, right? And then if you want to go to neutral, just pop it up half a click and you are in neutral. And now, you know something funny, it's in neutral and it won't go into first. So if you ever get that you're at a stoplight and you're not going into first, just give it a little nudge, maybe an inch, and it'll pop into first. It's just something with the transmission. So that's the number one thing to check. Now let's hop on the bike. Voila. First thing I always do when I jump on a bike, number one, kickstand up. You would be surprised. That'll take you for a rough ride if you forget the kickstand, which happens all the time in the beginning, of course, but never now. So kickstands up. So now I'm sitting here. I'm obviously in neutral. That's how I'm able to coast. Let's put it into first. There. If you're in first, you'll notice if the clutch isn't in, it's not moving, right? So let's talk about what we got on the bike. Left doesn't do anything. It's just a grip. Right, throttle. It'll rotate. Left, like I said before, is the clutch. Right, front brake. Right side foot, rear brake. Left side foot, the shifter. So, right here, kind of standard position for most motorcycles is the blinker for both sides. Will be right here. Unless you're on a BMW, then you've got the button on each side. But most bikes will have just the blinker right here. Turn the left blinker on, and then you push in to turn it off. Because most motorcycle blinkers don't turn off automatically. So left blinker and off. Let's turn the key on. All right, now let's go ahead and do it. Blinker, see my blinker's on. Even though I turn and not turn, it doesn't turn off. I turned it off, perfect. The little thingy up here is your far light, so your high beam. Most bikes, when you just kind of click it like that, it'll turn them on. Just so that way you can flash somebody. If you push it in or click it in, depending on the bike, then it'll turn it on permanently, right? So that's basically what we got on the bike. Over here is your on switch, and this is your kill switch. So to turn it on, you're going to, number one, hold in the clutch, And number 2, turn it on. I don't normally give it any throttle when I'm turning it on. It's really just pushing the starter until it starts up. So I've got a few little accessories on the bike. What I have on almost every bike is a cell phone holder. You can get it for, I think, like 15 bucks on Amazon. And over here is called a cramp buster or cramp guard. It's just a little piece of plastic, if you can see it, and it goes onto the throttle like that, and it holds it, so that way when I'm riding for a long distance I can just rest my palm on there. So that's really the only 2 accessories I ever get. So let's turn it off. So now let's talk about the basics of riding. So we've covered kind of what's what on the bike, we've covered what to check. Now let's start the ride, start the journey. Let's go ahead and turn it on. You'll notice I'm in first. I always make sure I'm in first when I do turn it on. Push the starter. The first thing we're going to do is just try to ride in a straight line. The way we're going to do that is slowly ease up on the clutch, very slowly, and very slowly give it some throttle. Ready? And just like in a car, you want to do them kind of at the same time, but very slowly, and pick up your feet as soon as you can. And stop. You'll notice one thing about my position here. I've got my pointer finger is always on the front brake. Always. So I've got the rest of my hand is doing the throttle, and my pointer finger is always on the front brake. I do that always every time I ride. So at first when you do it, you probably want to just kind of keep your feet down. That way you can kind of stabilize yourself, get used to the feeling of riding, and then pretty soon you'll be able to pick up your feet. So we don't want to practice. Now we're going to get into the second way of riding, which is going to be, well, I guess, practice going straight until you can keep your feet up, you know, for as long as possible, and not put your feet down until you absolutely have to without the bike falling over. It's kind of a nice habit because you don't want to drag your feet when you're riding along on streets and stuff, right? So now the second thing we're going to do is practice turning. And we're just going to go in a big circle at first, right? So you'll notice something unusual on bikes. It's a little bit different, right? When you're turning left, instead of pulling, or sorry, when you're turning right, instead of pulling right, you're actually going to push. So it feels very opposite of what you'd normally do. So you're going to want to turn right, and you just kind of slightly pull on the left and push on the right. So the bike is going to actually turn to the left, but that's going to lean you to the right, and that's what's going to turn you, right? So let me show you what I mean. We're going to just go in a big circle. Okay, so except for if you're going really slow. But if you're on the street going fast, you'll notice that you'll push out, and that's what's going to lean you into the turn. But if you're going really slow, obviously you'll want to turn the bike. So remember what I said when you're on the street, but in the parking lot it's obviously a little bit different. But on the street, super important to remember, as you're riding, if you want to turn right, kind of push and pull on the left hand. So the bike actually is turning left, but that's what's going to turn you right. I hope that makes sense. So when you want to turn left, you're going to pull on the right hand and push on the left, and that's going to turn you left. The reason why is because on a motorcycle, the way you're leaning is the way the bike's going to turn. Except for in a parking lot where you're going 2 miles an hour, right? So the first thing you're going to practice, obviously, is going in a straight line. Second thing you're going to practice is going in a circle. Now for the fun part. Once you can do circles and you can do straight lines, first thing I would recommend practicing over and over and over is when you're riding in a straight line, practice your emergency stops. And you'll notice I'm using, I would say, like 90% front brake and 10%, if that, back brake. And you just want to slam on the brake and do it several times so you get used to that really awkward feeling of just slamming on the brake. You want to do that over and over and over again until you get used to it and you get used to catching yourself. Because that'll happen a lot on the street where you just have to stop really fast, and if you're already used to stopping fast, there's no problem. If you're not used to stopping fast, then you'll drop the bike, right? So once you've done the straight line, once you practice your emergency stops, and once you've ridden in circles, big circles, then you start doing figure eights. These are extremely useful for motorcycle practice. Though, yeah, I would recommend practicing your figure eights over and over and over again until you can get them really close. You know what I mean? Because at first, when you're doing the figure eights, it's going to be really wide figure eights. But the better you get, the closer you'll be able to do them, and the slower you can do them. To where your balance, you're basically just getting used to balancing on the bike. Because a lot of times you can be riding at parking lot speeds, and you know the goal is to not drag your feet. Your feet want to be up on the pegs as much as possible. So again, practice your straight lines, practice your circles, practice your emergency stops, and then practice the figure eights over and over and over and over forever. And that's pretty much it. Once you got that down, then you've got the gist of it. You'll definitely pass the test. When I took my test for the first time, I didn't practice my figure eights the day of the test, and I failed it. So don't make that mistake. I remember I was just riding out on normal streets all day, and then I went and took the test, and we were going just like under 5 miles an hour the entire test, and my balance was not prepared for that. So when you're on the streets, always wear a helmet, always wear gloves, always wear the jacket. Obviously I'm not wearing gloves now because it's hot and I'm just trying to teach you how to ride. But no, when you're in the street, just always expect people to not see you. That does remind me of one other tip. So what I'll do a lot of the times is I'll leave my high beam on as I'm riding on the streets, especially during the day, just because most people, they just aren't used to seeing motorcycles, or their eyes just don't recognize the motorcycle just because it's one light instead of two lights like they'd normally see on a car, right? So if you got your high beam on, it might annoy some people, but it's better for them to be annoyed than for them to not see you at all, right? So you definitely want to annoy people instead of just them not noticing you're there. So again, turn on the high beams, leave them on as much as you can. Sometimes if it's not like a risky situation, or not even like there's nobody around, then I'll turn the high beams off because I don't like flashing into people's houses and stuff. Yeah, a lot of times I'll leave the high beam on. Other than that, second tip of the day is, as I kind of mentioned before, you want to get used to always having your pointer finger on the brake, just so you're prepared anytime to do like an emergency stop, with your feet on the pegs, of course, and your feet drop once you can no longer kind of balance yourself. But the other thing is, on the street, you want to use at least 90% front brake. 90% front brake, and then the rear is mainly stopping because you're downshifting. So I hardly ever use the back brake. The only time I do use the back brake is when I'm off-road, and I'll turn off the ABS, and then I'll use the back brake a lot, of course, and I won't use the front brake. So that's the only other time it'll be the opposite. If you're off-road riding, it's 90% back brake and 10%, if any, of the front brake. Main reason is just because if you're in the habit of using the back brake, then yeah, that's when you can drop the bike really easy in an emergency situation. When someone pulls out in front of you, not only will the bike take a lot longer to stop, but it'll slide out, right? If you hit that back brake really hard, you start skidding. Whereas if you hit the front brake, you're less likely to skid, and there's a whole lot more stopping power. That's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to let me know. See ya!